Hello viewers and welcome to Ask Cedars number 4, and I do apologise for somewhat neglecting the Ask Cedars series over the last few months. Quite frankly, there's been so much for me to deal with, and most notably the convention rebuttals have taken a lot of time up, but they're out of the way now so I can get back to answering questions. So we have a few lined up for you, and we are now going to listen to the first one in the form of a voicemail.
Hi Lloyd, it's Evelyn Delambre here. I've got a two-pronged question for you about the anointed. I've never been able to get my head around how someone knew that they were anointed. I've known a few and they always just seemed the same as other Jehovah's Witnesses, except more condescendingly pious. That's just been my experience. I've always felt it takes a certain type of arrogance and ego to say, yes, I've been chosen to rule at the side of Christ in heaven, and I'm being spoken to directly by the Holy Spirit. I just wondered what your thoughts are as to the type of person that is able to make this assertion. And secondly, due to the recent new light where the faithful and discreet slave is only the governing body and not the whole remnant, I'm just wondering if you think this has caused, or if you have any knowledge of any problems that this has caused internally, because it's almost like they've been relegated to a second-class position, whereas before they were up there at the top. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on these things, and thanks as always, Lloyd, for all your hard work. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn, and if you haven't yet checked out Evelyn's YouTube channel, you definitely should. In fact, while I'm mentioning Evelyn, you should also check out a couple of new podcasts that are out. Not Your Weaker Vessel is just out and it's fantastic. It's basically empowering women who were XJWs and giving them a voice. And a lot of you will also be familiar with Covert Fade, who has his own Forwardcast podcast. I will put links below for you to check those out. Evelyn has her own terrific channel, which I'm a huge fan of. And I will put a link below. As to the question of the anointed, I guess I kind of share your thoughts there, Evelyn, on it requiring a certain type of narcissism to suggest that out of all the Christians that have ever lived, you are one of only 144,000 that are basically the best of the best, who get to serve in heaven as kings and priests alongside Jesus. I've always found that a rather arrogant presumption to make about yourself. Of course, that's not to say that all anointed Jehovah's Witnesses or Jehovah's Witnesses who consider themselves anointed are arrogant or narcissists, because it turns out that Christianity teaches that when you die, you go to heaven. There isn't really place for a paradise earth if you actually read the Bible and consider what Christianity entails. So it could be that an anointed Jehovah's Witness feels they are anointed purely because they've read their Bible and they've concluded that there is no such thing as paradise earth. But if they're buying fully into JW theology, then yes, I do think it requires a certain amount of arrogance. And when you look at the governing body as a whole, you see no shortage of just the kind of arrogance and narcissism that you would need of a group of men who assume that they are part of the chosen few, that they should get to serve as rulers over the planet. You also ask about the 2013 new light, about the faithful slave being the governing body. And what that did was it really cut out the middleman and took the power away from the anointed ones as a class, and instead gave that power solely to the men who are on the governing body. I can only assume that that caused a great deal of hurt or upset among at least some of those Jehovah's Witnesses who profess to be of the anointed. But clearly any hurt or annoyance that there was among such ones wasn't enough to see a notable uproar among the ranks of believing Jehovah's Witnesses, because for the most part it seems as though witnesses have just internalized that new teaching and they've just gone along with it. I can remember speaking to my dad about the new light. Bear in mind, my dad isn't one of the anointed, but even so, it was interesting for me to be able to tell him about the new light before he knew about it, because I'd had access to a Watchtower article that hadn't been released yet. So I knew about this new light teaching, and when talking to Dad, he made very wishy-washy comments to the effect of, well, whatever Watchtower tells us, whatever the faithful slave tells us, I'm just going to go along with it. And I think that will more or less be the case for most Jehovah's Witnesses. Now it's time for our second question, which is from Will Lowe, who comments on YouTube. Hi Lloyd, a hypothetical question. If the Watchtower organization had no anointed governing body members running the show, do you think the members continue to believe, since there would be no channel to Jehovah? I reckon anyone can say they are anointed, but what proof is there? Yes, anyone can say they're anointed, so I think that there will never be a shortage of people who make that claim and who can therefore serve on the governing body, especially at Watchtower headquarters. But even if for whatever reason there was a complete absence of people who make that claim for themselves, I'm sure Watchtower would figure out some way of still having a leadership that isn't of the anointed and explaining, twisting Bible verses to explain the fact that they have their authority. It's been passed on to them like a mantle from the anointed. They'd have some way of explaining it all, and I'm pretty sure the majority of Jehovah's Witnesses would just go along with it. Lilith from Twitter says, my dad watched the 3-hour video of the Royal Commission. Unlike my prediction, he said his faith got stronger because Jeffrey Jackson did not lie at any point. On the contrary, Jeffrey Jackson showed that the organization has nothing to hide. How can I reason with him? Lilith, I don't think you can reason with someone who would draw that conclusion, having listened to Jeffrey Jackson's testimony at the Royal Commission. I actually published an article on JW Survey around the time of Jeffrey Jackson's testimony, pointing out all of the things that I found interesting, including the lies, including the evasion. And I guess your experience with your father just shows that if you are indoctrinated enough, you can find an explanation for pretty much anything. And it's similar in a way to my reaction to the BBC Panorama programme back in 2002 called Suffer the Little Children. And that really presented some compelling reasons why witnesses had, obviously they still have, but why they had back in 2002 appalling issues with child sex abuse. And despite watching that program, I was able, because I was still a believing witness, to find reasons and find excuses that would enable me to basically ignore what I'd just seen and heard. It sounds like your father has done pretty much the same thing here. I think if anything, your experience shows that it's not enough to just present someone with information. They need to be at a place in their lives where they're ready to entertain the idea that they're being exploited and that they're being lied to. It sounds like your dad is nowhere near that point. So I'm not really sure what you could say to him other than basically being ready for if he ever were to come to you expressing doubts or issues or wanting to understand what has motivated you to leave the religion. Now it's time for our second voicemail.
Hello, Lloyd. My name is Bart Perillo. I'm an ex-JW living in Florida. I was thinking on the lines that when Garrett Loesch said that he was not a member of Watchtower or had nothing to do with it, is it possible that the governing body members could be paid actors for Watchtower? Because it seems like that to me. I'm just curious, and thought I'd run it by you. Thank you very much for all your videos, and you're very brave. You're a wonderful person. Have a great day.
Thank you, Bob, for that really kind message. It's very, very uplifting to get that kind of message, and I appreciate it. Are the governing body members paid actors? Well, I can kind of understand where you're coming from. Bob is referring to Gerrit Loesch's sworn statement that he issued during the Jose Lopez case, in which he basically denied having any connection whatsoever with Watchtower, which was just incredible. And the argument I made at the time was, how can Watchtower say that witnesses need to be brave and point to verses where it says that you should be willing to make a defense of your faith, while at the same time issuing cowardly statements when their backs are against the wall just to get out of appearing before a court of law? I guess I'm simply not convinced that of something like what you're suggesting. I think that it's perfectly, it's to be expected, and there's nothing extraordinary about the kind of cowardice that's being shown by the governing body when they are asked to give an account of themselves. It's very unfortunate. It's certainly something that should give Jehovah's Witnesses pause for thought, but I don't think it's evidence that they are in any way insincere, let alone paid actors. I'm afraid this is the reality of the organisation that has witnesses captive. They're just awful cowards. That's the bottom line. So moving on to our next question, David Walker from Twitter says, internally, how did you deal with inconsistencies in JW Doctrine during your time as an active Jehovah's Witness? How did you interpret Matthew 15 verse 9? Matthew 15 verse 9 reads, "It is in vain that they keep worshipping me, for they teach commands of men as doctrines." And I would definitely agree. Looking at this verse as an awakened witness, I can definitely see that that fits with what Watchtower is doing. Listen, I guess that when you are a witness, similar to what I was saying earlier, you just internalize all of these inconsistencies. You are trained to wait on Jehovah, which basically means burying your head in the sand and not dealing in any meaningful way with all of the doubts and all of the inconsistencies that you're suppressing. You just have to basically live with them and ignore them to the extent possible. And if called upon, parrot Watchtower's line, Watchtower's official teachings, whether you agree with them or not. And that's why it's a cult, because there is no room for people to question things. There is no room, there is no way for you to approach the leaders and say, well, this clearly doesn't make sense. What are we going to do about this? You just have to go along and toe the line and make yourself believe, whether you believe or not. That's what being a Jehovah's Witness is all about. So I did deal with it as a Jehovah's Witness, albeit with great difficulty, because it turns out that those doubts never really go anywhere. They just stay in the background, and occasionally you'll get reminded of them. And it creates a great deal of cognitive dissonance, which is something I think a lot of witnesses have to cope with. Luke Giles, in his YouTube comment, says, my question is, what education do you think you might have undertaken, and which career might you have pursued had you not been brought up JW? That is a tough one, because it's hard for me to imagine my life without Jehovah's Witnesses in it, because obviously when you're raised a Jehovah's Witness from when you're very small, the religion basically defines who you are. I am a different person than I would be if I'd never been raised as a Jehovah's Witness. So it's impossible for me to say with any certainty what my interests would have been, what my skills would have been, how my life, how my career, how my education would have turned out without Jehovah's Witnesses. I can tell you that based on my passions now, if I were to go through college or university, I would probably look at studying something like philosophy, or I might be interested in studying journalism or filmmaking. Those are my sort of interests, as it were, now. And I might pursue them at some point through an official college course. I don't know yet. It's difficult where I am now in Croatia. But yeah, bottom line, it's very difficult for me to answer your question. I can only tell you what I would study now, given the opportunity. Now it's time for our next voicemail. We do have a number of voicemails for this Ask Cedars episode.
Hey Lloyd, I'm calling from the US. I just have a question. I am having a Bible study with a Jehovah's Witness. I was sort of born into it, but I never got baptized. I left the religion. My mom, she got out for a while, but she was never disfellowshipped, and then she was back in heavy. And my aunt is a Jehovah's Witness, and my fiance is a Jehovah's Witness. So I'm having a Bible study, really trying to wake people up in my family, but it doesn't matter what you show them, what you tell them. It's just, I'll leave it up in Jehovah's hands, or it's time will tell, whatever. But then I was having this discussion with his brother. I was trying to explain to him how 1914 is a made-up date, the pyramids and all that, and how 607 is not real. And I showed him with their own literature and, with dates and all of that, and how it's 587 when Jerusalem fell. But anyways, so we were talking about the anointed ones, and I tried to explain to him before it used to be where some of them were going to go right through without being, without dying. And now he's telling me that in order for Armageddon to start, they must all die. So they all have to be dead before Armageddon starts. All the anointed ones. And I was just wondering if that's new light or old light. He threw me for a loop on that one. So I was like, okay, I have to research that one. So just a question or something at you guys. All right, have a good one.
Thank you for that message. And this is actually something that I deal with in the Sunday of my Be Courageous convention rebuttal, because there has been a change in the understanding. As of, I think, 2013, the understanding changed. It used to be said that some anointed ones would survive through Armageddon and be there at the start of the new system. They would be there in Paradise Earth. And they've since changed it so that before Armageddon, the anointed will be raised to heaven. And as I point out in my video, or at least allude to, this means they get to participate in the slaughter of people like me and all those who are guilty of the crime of not following them. But that's basically the teaching now. And again, if you want to hear me talk about it in a little bit more detail, by all means, check out the Sunday of my Be Courageous convention rebuttals. Now it's time for our next question, which is a YouTube comment by Trust Olu, who says, "Hi Lloyd, thank you for your continued efforts. I was wondering if you could do a video on your issues with the Bible. I left Jehovah's Witnesses nearly 7 years ago after struggling for many years to fit in, but only in the last 2 months am I breaking free mentally. At this point, I am questioning the Bible as well." Well, I have made some videos on the Bible. There are two that I can point you to. One is a video about my top 10 immoral verses from the Bible, which pretty much deals with the Old Testament. And more recently, I did a video about 20 terrible ideas from the New Testament. I guess there's more that I can talk about when it comes to the Bible, because there's a lot that scholars have discovered about the authorship of the Bible and how it doesn't conform to what we understand about history from archaeology. But that's kind of an area in which I'm still doing my own research, and I don't feel comfortable talking with great authority on the subject while I'm still taking in knowledge myself, to coin a JW phrase. So yes, I probably will be making more videos in the future, but in the meantime, you'll find I'm never shy when it comes to sharing my thoughts on the Bible and the fact that I do think it is a man-made book that is shown far too much respect in modern society. Next question is from the Goldman24, comes in the form of a YouTube comment. Hi Lloyd, I'm wondering if and when you might address the flat earth versus globe issue. I'm interested to know your viewpoint on this matter. Cheers. I won't be addressing it because it isn't an issue. I've got a bit of sympathy for people who can't accept evolution, and that's why I talk about evolution quite a lot in my videos, because evolution can be quite complicated, and especially when it's misrepresented by creationists. But I don't think there's any excuse for believing in a flat earth. That just is basically ignoring the facts that are evident all around you. So I don't consider there to be an issue for me to answer there. Next question is from Fazamania on Twitter, who asks, why do Jehovah's Witnesses have kids? They believe Armageddon is imminent, so why bother? And in a later tweet he added, is it encouraged, discouraged by the elders? Do J-dubs think that the new world will carry on with the same family that they finished with? And will the children age in the new world? So on your basic question, witnesses have kids, I guess more due to their humanity. It's a human thing to want to have children. And no matter how devout your beliefs are, you can't always suppress that kind of urge to procreate, which is a natural urge. But the truth is that there are lots of witnesses who don't have children because of their beliefs. I certainly believed when I first got married that me and my wife needed to remain childless so that we could better serve Watchtower. I'm sure that there are many who graduate from the various Bible schools of Watchtower and who serve, for example, as circuit overseers and their wives, who are similarly going without having children under the assumption that it's better to make themselves available for Watchtower. And yes, to a certain extent, I'm sure it's true that witnesses don't have children also because of the belief that Armageddon is near. And would you really want to have to face the trials of the Great Tribulation with young children in tow, because Armageddon's supposed to be coming any day now? Do you really want to have a baby or a young child when it happens, and when the police start herding us all and circling around us in a field, as was depicted in the convention video? So I'm sure that there will be many witnesses who don't have children for that reason as well. And I can even remember continually being told as a child that it was a dilemma as to whether to have me, because I was born in 1979, and bear in mind they just had the whole 1975 thing, and it was very much a case when I was born of, okay, maybe they were wrong about 1975, but the end is still imminent. It's still in that sort of time scale. So it was a genuine dilemma apparently for my parents when they had me, and I'm sure that it will be similar for many witnesses today. As to what will happen, what were the other questions? Do JWs think that the new world will carry on with the same family that they finished with? Well, it depends. It depends whether you are talking about family in terms of children or family in terms of marriage, because there's obviously the scripture where Jesus said that there won't be marriage in the new system, at least for those who are resurrected. Obviously, we can read that now and it makes total sense, because as I said earlier, there is no room for a paradise earth in the Bible. And in that context, Jesus' words make total sense. But Watchtower is very ambiguous when it comes to reassuring married couples on that score. I actually refer to this, I talk about this a little bit in my book, because it causes people who have lost their husbands or wives a great deal of anxiety, not knowing whether they will see their spouse again. And you ask, and will the children age in the new world? I guess that they will age only to a point. So they will age upwards to say about 21, 22, 23. And old people will age downwards to more or less the same age, to the point where everyone is physically the same age. That's sort of what witnesses teach. Now it's time for our next voicemail.
Hello, Lloyd. My name is Lionel. I have discovered that in the WOL website, the Watchtower Society made available some publications since 1950 and other publications since 1970. That means that it is possible to read the Truth book, the truth that leads to everlasting life, and some older Watchtower articles back to the 1950s. Do you think it will be useful for those Jehovah's Witnesses who want to investigate the faith? Thank you.
It will be very useful, Lionel, and I actually applaud Watchtower for doing this. This has actually presented me with a challenge, because in my book, The Reluctant Apostate, I criticise the fact that it's impossible to read, or at least at that time, it was impossible to read the Revelation Climax book on jw.org. Now, of course, it is, along with a whole bunch of other publications, and I can only applaud them, because it is to some extent improving the amount of transparency. Do I expect Watchtower to make available even older publications, such as the writings of Russell and Rutherford? No, I don't. I think that there's a limit to how much information Watchtower will allow witnesses to have access to, or at least that's my expectation. Because when you read what was written by Rutherford and Russell, and you look at, for example, the Golden Age magazines with all of their medical quackery, there's no way you can come away from that thinking, oh, well, this was clearly wisdom from Jehovah back in that era in our history. You're left with the very clear realization that this is a man-made religion. So I think there's a limit as to how much information Watchtower will make available. But credit where credit's due, they've at least made a start, and I think it's good that it's easier for witnesses to do research into their own publications, because in my opinion, the best way of waking up from Watchtower indoctrination is indeed to read Watchtower's own publications. Now it's time for our next question from Twitter, which is from Simon Belant. Have you any thoughts on any way to sow a seed for waking of my brother, who is an elder? We had association years ago when our mum passed, but made a point of stressing that he would have to stop all contact after. I never physically see him now, as he's 100 miles away. Simon, I think it's very hard when you have that distance. It's another thing if you're living in the same household as a believing Jehovah's Witness. For example, if it happens to be your husband or wife, you're in close proximity, and they are in a situation where they need to convince you to start returning to the meetings, meaning that conversations are inevitable. And when those conversations occur, you can respectfully explain your position and have some interesting conversations that can cause them to think. In this situation where it's your brother and you have that physical distance between you, I would suggest it's almost impossible to do anything. I think you basically just have to leave it on him to put two and two together, which may never happen depending on how indoctrinated he is. But you certainly shouldn't feel guilt that you could be doing more, because you're both your own people now. You're both adults. You're both following your own course in life. And it really has to be down to him to ask these questions. There's nothing that you can do about it when you're not, again, living under the same roof or seeing him regularly. So I hate to be so defeatist. Incidentally, I was recently asked a similar question about what approach to take with people who are indoctrinated. And if you haven't seen it already, I have a video. I'm trying to Google the title quickly. Bear with me. The video is titled 7 Tips for Helping Someone Out of a Cult. So if you are in a situation where you can have dialogue with someone who is in a cult, doesn't have to be Jehovah's Witnesses, it might be that you find some of my advice in that video helpful. Goatbone, in his YouTube comment, says the following: judging by the convention outlines, they're whipping up furore that the end is imminent. How will they reach everyone on earth with this hailstone message, when in fact, up till now, Jehovah's Witnesses still haven't reached 1/3 of Earth's population with the good news of the kingdom, Middle East, and vast swathes of Asia, etc.? That's a great question. It's something I've been banging on about since I first started my activism. It simply cannot be said that Jehovah's Witnesses are reaching everyone with the good news. Even if they can say that they are in diverse parts of the planet, it can't be said that they're everywhere, and it certainly can't be said that they are evenly distributed around the globe, which means that apparently God favors some countries or some parts of the world when it comes to drawing people to his organization. But you make an excellent point. There's simply no way that Jehovah's Witnesses, whether it's the message of good news or whether it's the message of judgment, the hailstone message, there's no way that they can reach everyone with that message. And Muffin Case asks on Twitter, do you get many hate messages? How do you deal with them? Well, to help answer that question, I thought I would play for you my next voicemail, which is a hate message.
I would like to know how long you were a Jehovah's Witness and why you hate them so much. And you talk so much about them, but you have all their books right there. What is it that hurt you so much that you feel that you have the right to attack Jehovah's Witnesses and they're not a cult?
So I didn't catch the name there, I'm afraid. But yeah, I think we can say that qualifies as a hate message. I don't get that many of them, to be honest, Muffin Case. I do inevitably get some. They usually come in the form of comments on YouTube or messages via social media. And for the most part, I don't know, it kind of depends on what kind of mood I'm in. If it's a Jehovah's Witness who's lashing out and I feel as though there's a possibility that by saying something or asking a question, I can get them to engage or maybe think about things. If I have the time, I might say something. But for the most part, I basically ignore hate messages. Especially the really nasty hate messages, of course, are the hate messages I get from other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. By far the most pushback I've had on my activism work has come not from Watchtower and not from believing Jehovah's Witnesses, but from fellow ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who are resentful at the platform I have, at me saying things that they don't agree with. And those hate messages can be very, very personal and quite hurtful, which is why I basically ignore them and tend to just block people that make those comments on social media. And I try basically to do my work. I can't do my work, and I can't have the creative energy to do my work if I'm listening to every voice of negativity that's kind of barking at me. I can only do my work by basically cancelling it out and focusing purely on Watchtower and on my work of trying to help Jehovah's Witnesses. And if you're watching this and you did leave that voicemail message, quite clearly, I don't hate Jehovah's Witnesses. I do my work precisely because I care about Jehovah's Witnesses. I have lots of family members and former friends who were Jehovah's Witnesses who I care about deeply, and I want to help them. I've even made a video explaining why I don't hate Jehovah's Witnesses. If anything, it's my love for them that motivates me to do this work, because I don't think that they deserve to be lied to, and I don't think they deserve to be exploited. And I'm obviously expressing my thoughts on Watchtower, which are always expressed on a take it or leave it basis. And if I say something wrong, by all means correct me. And I invite any believing Jehovah's Witness to come on my channel. Let's have a Skype interview and you explain to me why I'm wrong and pitch your beliefs to my viewers. I'm sure my viewers would love to have an actual Jehovah's Witness on the channel, but of course witnesses aren't allowed to engage in that way with former believers, which is sad, because I think you achieve more by having dialogue. But yes, I certainly don't hate Jehovah's Witnesses. In fact, I received a lot of flack last year for protesting the ban of Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia. I got a lot of hatred from some ex-Jehovah's Witnesses for taking that stance. So if that doesn't illustrate the fact that I don't hate Jehovah's Witnesses, I don't know what does. Luke Giles, in his YouTube comment, says, another question, have you thought of putting together a digital information package that succinctly outlines the potential emotional and psychological impacts of JW belief and exiting, so that Jehovah's Witnesses accessing counselling have a resource which pinpoints the specific emotional difficulties they may be experiencing? It's just that you're very good at brief and clear summaries, and something of that nature could be immensely helpful when it comes to accessing helping services. Luke, that's an excellent suggestion. I don't actually need to do that because it's already been done by someone else. If you go to, I'm just Googling as I speak, or typing in the address as I speak. If you go to bonniezeman.com, Bonnie is an ex-Jehovah's Witness who also happens to be a psychotherapist. I've interviewed her on this channel, and you can actually go to a section called For Therapists on her website, which actually has a document for therapists where she's actually made available for download information that helps therapists understand the specific issues related to people escaping cults. So that's already been done by Bonnie. She's even released a book titled Cracking the Cult Code for Therapists, what cult victims want their therapists to know. So I don't need to do that. It's already been done, and it's been done by someone who's far more knowledgeable on mental health than I am. So the next question is from Jesse Maximus on Twitter, who asks, how do you best ensure that your child can resist JW indoctrination when your spouse or ex is fully indoctrinated. That is a really hard one. I touch a little bit on that subject in my book, How to Escape from Jehovah's Witnesses. I guess my only advice would be that if you lead by example, if you show in your own life that being able to think critically, that being able to think for yourself is producing happiness and fulfillment and contentment, and if your child can see that, they may feel naturally drawn towards you as opposed to drawn to Watchtower. And another point I make in my book is that I don't think children innately like being Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not a normal thing for a child to have to sit in a windowless building for hours on end and absorb all of this material that's just being chucked at them, most of which they're too young to understand. They can just about bring themselves to do it, but as for enjoying it, that's something else entirely. I can't see how especially younger children can enjoy that experience. Again, if you, on the other hand, are showing that you can be a moral, upstanding member of society who is happy and content and fulfilled without any of that, that for me is the most powerful statement that they could have, that you never know may help them to break free from the indoctrination that's being forced on them. But again, it's never quite that straightforward. I would just suggest being patient, being loving, try not to be the bad parent. In other words, try not to be the one laying down ultimatums. You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to go to the Kingdom Hall. You're not allowed to go on the ministry. Try to be the good guy. Try to be the good cop rather than the bad cop. And just show that you're the better person. And hopefully with time, with love, with patience, good will prevail. But I've never been in that situation. So you're probably better off asking someone who has been through that situation and has managed to win over their children or steer their children away from repeating their mistakes by joining the witnesses. So it's a tricky one, but those are just a few bits of advice that I have. And we're now down to my final question, which is another voicemail.
Hi Lloyd, do you have any ideas or knowledge on how to successfully request and be supplied with sensitive personal information held by the Watchtower organization on oneself? Also, do you have any knowledge on the potential for suing based on the inappropriate manner of elders' investigations of highly private and sensitive matters without any real consent from the subject or training or qualification to handle such an interview? In fact, does this organizational practice breach privacy laws, and is there potential to get it investigated and stopped? Thank you.
I guess that's a great question, by the way. Thank you for that. I guess I'm at a loss to give a particularly helpful answer because I'm not a legal expert. I don't have any legal training. So I can only offer you some very basic guidance, which is that in most countries, or at least in most European countries, there is an information commissioner, or there is a governmental body set up to deal with data protection. And if you are in a European country and you are concerned about the records that Watchtower might have on you, particularly as they pertain to the new GDPR regulations, I would urgently recommend that you give your local information commissioner a phone call just to find out where things stand, what your rights are, and they should be able to give you some advice as to how you can go about obtaining any records that Watchtower may be holding on you. In my own case, it isn't really a pressing matter because I've been very public about my background with the witnesses. I don't feel as though I have anything to hide. If Watchtower wants to keep records on me, quite frankly, it's not keeping me awake at night. But just because I feel that way doesn't mean everyone feels that way. I can well understand why there would be many, perhaps watching this video, who absolutely object to any information on them personally being kept by Watchtower. So I guess, again, I would urge going through the relevant governmental bodies. I don't know how the laws differ in, for example, America. I'm not aware of the data protection laws being anywhere as stringent as they are in Europe. Sounds like you might be calling from Australia. Again, I'm not too sure what the laws are there, although if you go on jwfacts.com, I think Paul Grundy, who is Australian, he went through the process of requesting his records back from Watchtower. So I guess if I was in Australia, I would want to study what he did. As to the question of the legality of elders probing people with very inappropriate questioning, and whether that's something that can be where you can sue Watchtower for that, or whether you can sue congregations or individual elders, I am at a complete loss as to what I can recommend there, because again, I'm not a legal expert. It could be that there is some violation of privacy laws depending on what the local laws are in your country. But I guess the way to find out would be to take some legal advice, to find a lawyer who specializes in privacy laws. If you can get a free consultation, not all lawyers offer free consultations, but just see what they say and see if they can offer you any hope that there is a case there to pursue. But that would be my advice, basically, to pursue the governmental bodies who are responsible for dealing with that side of things, and or approach a lawyer and ask for their advice. So that's all of the questions, and thank you for that question, by the way, and thanks to all of you who have sent in questions. Again, I'm really sorry it's taken me so long to do part 4 of Ask Cedars. I do intend to continue doing this regularly. It's just I got completely overwhelmed with work in the last few months. But if you want to have me answer your question in a future video, there are 3 ways that you can give me your question. First of all is by including it as a comment below. Secondly is on Twitter. Make sure you include the hashtag Ask Cedars. That way I can easily find your question when I'm compiling them before doing the video. And the third way is by dropping me a voicemail, which you can do on speakpipe.com/Cedars. Those are the 3 ways that you can ask Cedars, and hopefully I'll be able to answer your question in the next video. But that's pretty much all I've got time for. I do hope you've enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to subscribe for more videos. And as always, thank you for watching.